What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Drumroll Please, Zach and EJ Talk Sports. This is episode 19, the Tony Gwynn episode. I fought hard for the EJ Gaub episode because I wore 19 in high school football. But my partner felt very strongly that this episode should not be the EJ Gaub episode. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, EJ. How are you?
How are your holidays?
They were nice. It was a good holiday. How about you?
Yeah, I went to Disney.
That's always fun.
I'm a big Disney guy.
Yeah.
Big fan of Disney. They do it right down there. I also went to Universal when I was down there as well. Went to Harry Potter World.
You like that?
I do, but I got some gripes. I feel like Harry Potter World, it's too narrow, the streets. So it's too condensed. So they have the same amount of volume, but the way they built it is you were just like sardines in there. But their rides are, I think more of the thriller type rides than you get at Disney. But I did ride the new Tron ride.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Did you ride Tron when you were there?
did not. It was. I don't think it was open the last time I was there.
You were the Grand Marshal of the parade, though.
I was once, yeah.
What age was that?
10. 10. No. 12? 10, 11, or 12. One of them.
All right. Well,
yeah.
Good news. NFL playoffs are on the way, which means one of those teams will eventually finish with the MVP, who will be having their own little parade down in Disney at one point. So, up at this point, your thoughts on the playoffs and the end of the NFL season as it stood.
So let's just start with the playoffs. The games, while they were obviously important because it's playoffs, the games were mostly pretty boring. Bills Steelers was boring to watch. Bucks Eagles was kind of fun just because everyone was rooting for the Bucks, but it wasn't like a good game to watch. Eagles scored 9 points. It wasn't close. Rams Lions was the only actually close game. The Packers just killed the Cowboys. The Chiefs just killed the Dolphins, and the Texans killed the Browns. So really there wasn't very many close games, but I felt like I'm excited for this week because I think the 8 teams left are all pretty even, where I think all of the games anyone could win them.
Right. Well, so here's my thing. First off, yeah, you're pretty much right. There wasn't really anything to get super excited about. But what is it with the NFL and their love affair with Josh Allen? Is it just me? Or, literally, I'm pretty sure Tony Romo has, I heart Josh Allen,
I will say, did you watch the game?
Which game?
The playoff game.
Yes.
Josh Allen he's amazing. I don't want to side with Tony Romo because he's terrible, but Josh Allen, I've been watching him, and I've watched Mahomes all year. He has been, besides Lamar Jackson, obviously, the best quarterback, and I think he might be a better quarterback than Lamar Jackson. He obviously has the turnover issues, but that's going to happen when you throw it like he can throw it. So I don't really mind the turnovers as much when he limits them to, when he's throwing 4 picks a game, obviously, it's a problem, but when he's limiting the turnovers, there's almost no players who can do what Josh Allen does. So I kind of understand it to an extent.
So is Josh Allen amazing, or is he just kind of like a bigger Brett Favre, who just kind of is out there and is just throwing that ball over, and when it works and it clicks, he is, the most amazing player in the NFL, MVP, Mr. January, as Tony Romo likes to call him. But when he's not, he's getting his offensive coordinators fired.
But has Brett Favre ever been able to run the ball like Josh Allen can?
Brett Favre ran, man.
But not like Josh Allen. And I'm not going to lie, I've never seen Josh Allen not show up in a playoff game. Since he flipped the switch in his career when he went from being terrible in his rookie and sophomore year, and then he just became an elite quarterback, he shows up when his team needs him. His team needed him. They were on the brink of elimination. They ended up winning the division. So I feel like out of all the quarterbacks in the league, I trust Josh Allen the most to show up when I need him.
So you, right now, got to put one quarterback in for your championship drive. You're putting him in over Mahomes.
Right now, at this current moment.
This moment.
I'm going to go with Mahomes right now just because he has won championships. But Josh Allen's very close. I think by the end of this year, I might just switch to Josh Allen.
Are they they're not the same draft class.
No,
Mahomes is one class ahead.
Mahomes was 2017 with Trubisky and Watson.
Yeah.
And then Allen was 2018 with Baker.
Right. And the year before was Goff, right?
2016, that was Goff. Or was Goff 2015?
Was it Goff in
Or was Winston?
Goff and Wentz were the same class.
I want to say 2016.
So that would have been them. Then the following year was Trubisky.
Mm-hmm. Then
and Mahomes. Then we had the draft class
with Baker and Allen, and then
following year was Tua, Burrow,
and then Kyler. No, the following year was Kyler, then Burrow, Tua, then Lawrence, then no good quarterbacks, Kenny Pickett, and then Stroud and Young, obviously.
Yeah, right. Boy, them Carolina are kicking themselves now. A lot of coaches, out of work. And touching on that briefly, New England fan.
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like the end of an era to you, or does it feel like it was time for a change?
I think the era has been over for a few years. Since that playoff game when the Bills beat us badly, that was not our year, but it was the year when we were like, we can win without Brady, with Belichick, and then we just got crushed in the first round of the playoffs. And it was almost like, maybe we might need to switch things. For the last few years, we just haven't had an offense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's not as much Belichick, the coach's fault, as it is Belichick, the GM's fault. Because Belichick was just a bad GM. He didn't bring in any offensive pieces. The offensive pieces he did bring in were overpaid and bad. Our entire team, our entire coaching just let our team down. They let Mac Jones down, who obviously won't be our quarterback anymore, and he's terrible. But I feel like he could have been less terrible. I'm actually glad Bill O'Brien's gone. He's leaving for Ohio State. So we'll bring in a new offensive coordinator, but probably just Josh McDaniels again, which I don't mind. He's a good offensive coordinator.
Bringing him back to New England, or do you think he'll go with Bill to Atlanta when Bill signs? Which is where I think he's going to end up.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think he'll probably come back to New England.
Really?
Though it's interesting because I think originally the head coaching job was promised to him. Then he left. He got impatient. He left for the Raiders, and we then promised it to Mayo.
Well, he also left for like a day to go to Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out. So, can I call Belichick overrated? Like, can we call him overrated?
Like coach?
Well, let me ask you this. Head coach in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Good or not?
Stefanski?
No. Belichick, when he was in Cleveland.
Nah.
Okay. First couple years at New England. Bledsoe.
No.
His following 3 years post-Brady.
Well, 1 year he was almost the 1 seed in the AFC.
And then what happened?
What happened to the Dolphins this year? Is Mike McDaniel a bad coach?
You can make the argument that I'm not a super fan of all the moves.
You can't... That's ridiculous. Like,
how is it ridiculous?
Let's talk about Phil Jackson.
Let's talk about
what was he without Jordan and Kobe?
How much did he play without Jordan and Kobe?
It's Belichick. How many years are we looking at here? It's like...
Looking at his whole tenure in Cleveland.
I feel like you're looking at a guy who you're saying, what is he when he has no good players on his team?
Well, no. Not no good players. Players. But if we're saying that if somebody showed you a graph, simply, you didn't even know who it was Johnny X, football coach. And here is Johnny X's statistics without this particular player. And you see some crazy low number. And then you see Johnny X's statistics with that player, and that bar is like through the roof.
Mm-hmm. But
you're telling me you look at that and be like, no, that guy is on par, regardless of whether or not that variable is in the equation.
This is ridiculous, though. You're saying, what is Bill Belichick without the greatest player of all time?
Yes.
And then what is he with the greatest player of all time?
Yes.
Obviously, he's going to be better with the greatest player of all time.
Yes. But they're dramatically different. He hadn't had a winning season since Brady left.
He did.
What year?
The year we made the playoffs.
What year was that?
2021, I believe.
That was your second year, because that was the year after Cam.
Yeah. We might have had a winning record the Cam year, too.
No.
We were 10-7 in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
In 2020.
And got obliterated in the playoffs.
Yeah, 2020 we were 7-9. But you're not obliterated in the playoffs. It's not like we're talking about the regular season. Bill Belichick, who was on that team? The 2021 team. You're saying his best player is Matt Judon. Who's his best offensive player?
Ramondre Stevenson.
Exactly. No, that was Damian Harris. Our best offensive player. It's not. He had pretty much nothing in.
But he was also your GM.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's a good GM. He's a fraud as a GM if you want. So he's a terrible GM. But as a coach, Bill Belichick is just a great coach.
But
The
didn't his
greatest
offense
coach of all
also
time.
fall apart when? Well, okay, so
Is he our offensive coordinator?
but how can you? So it's kind of not fair that you give him a pass as a GM with his inability to properly assess wide receivers when year after year after year after year he misdiagnosed wide receivers, right? He brings the same coordinators back into his fold, so you can argue, okay, they know his system, whatever it is, but still, like, at what point, how do you pull apart everything that's going on and say, this is Bill Belichick? I'm not going to sit here and say that Bill Belichick isn't a defensive mastermind, that he isn't a person that can sit down and create an amazing defensive scheme. But if you were talking about somebody that is the head football coach and has two dudes, one a former defensive guy that has been doing nothing but getting fired from every organization he's been a part of, we're going to talk about Matt Patricia, and the guy that lasted like 2 seasons in New York as a head coach, that everyone was shocked when he got hired. And the first one, Joe Judge, splitting offensive play calling. Isn't that your responsibility as a head coach? Didn't you sit back and say, this seems like a winning idea? We're going to have two guys that basically know nothing about offense running our offense. So how does that not fall on a head coach? How is that not? So I can sit here and say, yes, absolutely. Defensive guy, you say, hey, look, do your thing with the defense. But then, because his son, who is a strength coach, is now a D coordinator, and then there's all these problems there. Like, it's just, when you look at, in my opinion, you're not just talking about the greatest player of all time with Tom Brady from a statistical point, but you're about somebody that bought into what Belichick was doing and held players accountable, right? Had his own high standards that created a culture. So again, if what Belichick was doing, like, we could make the argument, right, that Sean McVay is an incredible NFL head coach.
Okay,
right?
I agree.
And we could sit there and we could look at the guys that came up under McVay. And they're all going out getting these head coaching jobs or coming up as coordinators, and they're all doing their thing. Mike McDaniel, you could argue part of it, right? Kyle Shanahan, all this stuff. Like, part of this kind of tree, that these guys formed from, right? Or you look at like the Andy, the Andy Reid tree, right? But every single coach, almost down to the man, that has been a Belichick guy, has failed.
I think that's almost disproving your point, though.
But how?
Because they're trying to run a Bill Belichick system. You know who can run a Bill Belichick system? Only Bill
Tom
Belichick.
Brady? Tom Brady can run Bill Belichick.
Why do we need to look at what is Tom Brady, what's Bill Belichick? Together, they were amazing. And
100%.
Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time. I think without Bill
Don
Belichick...
Shula is technically the most winningest coach of all time.
Without Bill Belichick, Tom Brady's not winning all of his rings.
But he won a ring down in Tampa without Bill
Well, he'd win maybe one ring. Do you think Tom Brady would be the player he is today without Bill Belichick?
Part of me does.
That's absurd.
Why?
Because Bill Belichick. What are we talking about here?
If we get past, what I'm saying is, let's get past the shock and awe of the name and the grumpy man with the hood on. Super respect and massive fan of the game, respectful of the game. I understand personally his outlook towards the media, which is like, hey, look, I'm here coaching football. All this media stuff is just this extra coverage that people want, in terms of diving into our sport. I'm focused on our sport. I'm not focused on the entertainment component for everybody out there. So my job is to come out and give you sound bites. The new coaches understand that, because they might understand, hey, being friendly with the media might lead to more lucrative, sponsorships and broadcasting gigs, post things. So I understand all that, and I personally, not that anybody needs my pass sitting here, but speaking from this perspective. But if we're talking about a body of work, right? Like if I was, general manager of a business, and I had my assistant general manager. So prior to this assistant general manager hire or somebody coming in and joining my ranks, I am mediocre at what I do, right? Mediocre. And then I had the assistant general manager, who me and him combine, and our sales numbers go through the roof. Now, of course, he attracts attention, and he goes off and gets his own gig somewhere else. And the second he's gone, I kind of recede back to being mediocre again. where's my responsibility? Where's my culpability in that? Can I still be called a great general manager of something? Because shouldn't my job be to keep finding and developing and cultivating future assistant general managers to come up and take these ranks? But we haven't seen that.
So, what are you arguing that Bill Belichick's a bad GM? Because then I agree with you. Are you arguing that he might not be the best offensive-minded coach? I agree with you. But he's still the best defensive coach of all time.
Okay, now you put the word defensive in front of it, and that's where I agree. But if we are talking about the greatest straight-up coach of all time, I disagree. I'm not saying he's overrated to the point of, like, there's 30 other NFL coaches who are better than Bill Belichick. No, that's what we are talking about, that 1% again. But if he goes to Atlanta, which odds are he does, and he falls flat on his face in Atlanta, does that do anything to you? Does that, or now do we blame Atlanta? Well, he went to Atlanta, blah, 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 blah. And the second he leaves Atlanta, some young gun comes in and turns the franchise around.
Two things. I don't think he'll fail in Atlanta. And if he does, I don't think it'll help him. And it might hurt him a little, but it's not going to say, oh, Bill Belichick's fraud. Because you know what? No one's won with that Atlanta team yet.
Right. Well,
so it's not like someone before him was better than him and then he failed. It's, no one's figured it out yet. Maybe he'll figure it out. Maybe he won't. If he doesn't, maybe it'll take a little hit. Maybe it'll be like, maybe he's not as good as I thought he was. But he's still an all-time great coach.
He is a great coach. But I sit here and I feel that if we are saying Belichick, Brady has only one. The dude is only one, right? Left New England, Super Bowl, right? The next year, one play away from beating the team that goes on to win the Super Bowl when they lost to the Rams. And his last year, when they lost to Dallas last year, they were just, that was just what it was. But still made the playoffs. So this guy, all he does is win, right?
But you're acting like he went to a Tampa team that had no weapons. He had very good weapons in Tampa.
100%.
The first Super Bowl run, I'll tell you, that was all Tom Brady because he also had a terrible coach. He was also the head coach of that team, essentially, when Bruce Arians was their head coach. But the last 2 years, it was really just Tom Brady was good, and he obviously almost won another Super Bowl when they almost beat the Rams, and you never know what would happen there. But I just feel like you're trying to separate Tom Brady's ex without Bill Belichick. Just together, they were great. I feel like you need to just accept that they were both a great coach and a great player.
Well, I don't know if I said that they weren't. What I am saying is that I feel that in this partnership, Belichick is getting too much credit for it. That's what I feel. That's my point. I'm not saying he's not a good coach. I'm saying he's probably the best defensive-minded coach in NFL history. And I think I put that above. But as a head coach, somebody who's developing a coaching staff, developing a culture, developing players through your system, I don't see it. Now, where you might say, well, that kind of now blurs this line between Belichick the GM and Belichick the coach, I still think if you hear about the Patriot way and you're entrenched in an organization for 20 years and you want to turn and say, oh, well, maybe Brady's last 2 years, there were a lot of guys aging out and this and that and this. But you have so much stability at the top of the organization and you have the ability to, bring in free agents. So was it that eventually the assessment of talent, the complete inadequacy of assessing wide receiver talent, and and having losing particular coaches that didn't last long wherever they went, somehow cripples the organization?
Two things. One, you said Brady's last 2 years. We won a Super Bowl in Brady's second to last year.
It was the last year.
Last year, obviously, we lost to the Titans.
We still made the playoffs.
But we did. And also, you're talking about developing players. And near the end, we obviously missed a lot of draft picks and a lot of things like that. But when you look at the overall Belichick Patriots era, we developed the greatest quarterback of all time, the greatest player of all time, the greatest tight end of all time, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker. We can keep going. We had a lot of great players. And are you saying he gets no credit for those, but he takes all of the blame for guys like N'Keal Harry and guys like that who we totally missed on?
Well, that's a fair point. But, Wes Welker wasn't homegrown. He was a Dolphin that you guys signed in free agency, right? So, and I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's an answer for that, because now we're getting into a debate of how much is the player and how much is the coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh well, you had this guy on your team, you had this guy on your team. How much? I mean, would we say Belichick developed Randy Moss?
No,
Right.
I didn't say
I
Randy
know,
Moss.
but I'm saying, like, that's my point. Did Belichick develop Julian Edelman? Did he develop, or was this? Did they see players that had a particular skill set that they knew could fit the system that they were running? But you mentioned, somebody like Phil Jackson, and watching that Lakers, mockumentary or whatever you want to call it, Showtime. It does raise an interesting point even about coaching, right? Like, is a great coach always necessarily the X's and O's? Or is a great coach somebody that might say, hey, look, I might not have all the X's and O's. I might not be the best in the X's and O's, but I can come in and I can get your, gone rogue players under control in a way where I can relate to them, I can talk to them, and I can connect to them, and I can get them to buy into the concept of a team or whatever. So I don't necessarily know if I can turn around and put great coach and write out the perfect job description, right? Because in the NFL today, is it more about being able to relate to players and being able to, understand the modern game and give those players a sense of structure that they feel they can be themselves in, and toe that balance of, hey, we can be fun and we can be you, but we're also going to be us? Or, is it just strictly about X's and O's and saying, no, I got this superior system, I know the players I need, I'm going to plug them in like widgets, and run, my system, the Patriot way, or whatever you want to call it. So that's the thing that I find the most fascinating about the concept of a head coach in any organization, is you might have guys that aren't necessarily the strongest X's and O guys. Belichick, incredibly strong X's and O's defensive coordinator, but and defensive mind, but was he the best, when we say greatest coach, at like relating to his players and assessing talent and being able to sustain a winning culture when key players step out? I mean, wouldn't that be the sign of a great organization? Like, isn't that what they say the greatest thing about the Packers is? Look what the Packers did. The Packers went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love without like having to constantly have these massive rebuilds, right? So like, wouldn't that be the mark of like super great stability? And through that time, they've had different head coaches. So I find it interesting, and that's what I wanted your perspective of how much it is of Belichick in terms of we talk about the Patriot greatness, and how much it is of Brady or Kraft or whatever. And I think your answer is probably right. It's a combination.
So I feel like you're kind of under giving not enough credit to the Patriot culture when Belichick was in the Brady years. People wanted to play with the Patriots, and Belichick cared about who was on his team. He brought in Antonio Brown, and obviously maybe that was more Brady than him, but Antonio Brown did something wrong. He said, we can't have this guy on our team. He got rid of him. He brought in guys who were going to do the work but not really be as flashy. They cut Tim Tebow. And I find it very interesting because Tom Brady obviously stayed for a very long time. If the culture, if he didn't relate at all, if he was just this guy who did the X's and O's and didn't relate to his players, I think Tom Brady would have left sooner.
Okay.
That's just me.
I get it. No, you listen. That's what I find fascinating about it. That, or I just get a chance to kind of ruffle your feathers, which is what I enjoy more than anything else. The next thing I want to ask you about, home field advantage in the NFL. I'm a huge fan of home field advantage, and I think it should be leaned into, like, as much as possible. Again, my Miami Dolphins, embarrassed. I take ice baths. And what I can tell you is this, that if I am chilling right now, and then I get into an ice bath, I'm chilling in a whole different way, and it's not a good way, right? So if I am down in South Beach all week long, training down there, and then I'm going to fly in, and I'm going to get out and just throw on some warm weather gear and think that I'm going to be okay in that situation, that is a massive, massive advantage for the Kansas City Chiefs, which they earned. So home field advantage to me is more than just like your first round of the playoffs or second round. To me, you should be building your team based off the division you play in and the elements you play in. Miami Dolphins want to go and you want to build the greatest show on turf, awesome. But how is that greatest show on turf going to be when you're in freezing cold weather in Buffalo, in New England, and up here in Jersey playing the Jets? When all your other big teams, Kansas City in the cold, Baltimore, cold, Cincinnati, cold, Cleveland, cold. I mean, I feel that stadiums and teams that build a home field advantage like that absolutely have every right to lean into it, and kind of leveling that out or canceling games. I mean, other than obviously things that are unsafe, that are going to put fans in jeopardy or players' health in jeopardy where things get too cold. But I'm all for it.
I personally, and I don't know if this is a opinion that's shared by a lot of people, I feel like weather shouldn't really have an impact on playoff games. So the Dolphins, which you're saying they should have been prepared for the cold. They play this whole season. They almost win the division, obviously. They probably should have won the division. They couldn't beat a good team. But they had a very good year. They get to the playoffs. And they get hit with -4 degrees. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you prepare or whatever. You're not preparing the whole season for cold like that, and you play in Miami. I think every NFL stadium should be a dome. I think all games should be played indoors. And I just feel like, because the weather, you play this whole season and suddenly you get hit with the snow card. And you're like, oh, well, we have to totally change our game plan for what I'm doing the whole season. If it's like snowing, your throw first team, you're like, oh, we might have to lean on the run a bit more. You're going away from what your team really is. I feel like it should be indoors. You should just have team against team. You can have the home field advantage of your fans, your home stadium, but I don't think it should be the home field advantage of the weather.
Well, again, I mean, then wouldn't that just dramatically change the game? I mean, if that was the case and everybody just played indoors, then, how long would it be before we start going to 7-on-7? And it's just get a bunch of fast guys and just have them run around like crazy. And, we don't need, to really put any emphasis on the running game. I feel like I look back and, the weather plays, they say what? It's always like the great neutralizer, right? Because both teams got to play in it. Rain, maybe. Like, a torrential downpour, has a dramatic impact on the game with your ability to throw the ball, things like that. Like, I understand. But if we go to a dome and we kind of sterilize everything, at the same point in time then too, we could almost make the argument that in some ways, outside of the volume of the home crowd, like what is there really to play for then? Like who's going to be that fired up then? Like if I'm going to go play in Buffalo in a dome, as opposed to playing at home in our dome, like does it really matter? Like that much at that point in time then? Like if everybody's kind of playing on the same field. Like, I'd like to see the statistics of, I mean, even, for example, in baseball. I mean, I guess basketball is the closest, right? Because all the, baseball, you have different home run, walls and lengths, and fields can be a little bit different dimension. So I guess basketball is the closest to having...
I'd say in basketball, I think if you ask any players, there's a big difference from playing in Minnesota to playing in Madison Square Garden. And they're both indoors, but I feel like you can still have the differentiators and the home field advantage indoors.
Well, listen, I agree with your points on the home field advantage, and I'm going to concede that argument to you. My final question of the day, and something I've been thinking about, especially as my fantasy season came to a typical conclusion that ended in crash and burn, is fantasy football, from a fan standpoint, is fantasy football right now actually bigger than NFL football in terms of people really being more invested in their fantasy teams or their actual rooting team. And let me preface by saying I am talking about, I'm not talking about the difference between like Fireman Ed, who's doing, this thing before the Jets, get ready to go out and get demolished, and like somebody that's like, oh, I joined my work fantasy team and I didn't check my lineup. I'm talking about the person that like, hey, fantasy season's coming. I got some people like me and you that, we're invested enough. I'm not ready to, cut tires and freak out on people over fantasy, decisions. But like I get riled up a little bit.
I'll say this: I think there's a lot of people who don't watch football or don't really know football who do fantasy. I don't know how many people besides there's a good amount of people I think who are probably older fans who watch football and don't do fantasy. But I think a good amount of people who watch football do fantasy. I think a lot of people who don't watch football do fantasy. And me personally, I watch Red Zone, and that's mostly because of fantasy football, so I can know what my players are doing. And especially this year, because the Patriots were so bad, fantasy football definitely, I valued it more than rooting for the Patriots.
I mean, even the scrolling stats on the screen, like, I feel like I've seen as fantasy football entrenches itself more and more into pop culture that, like, just even the way that, like, I mean, even on the NFL Network, they have fantasy football shows. ESPN now has fantasy football shows on all their morning and, like, NFL Sunday show. Like, they all have, like, fantasy football segments. Like, you mentioned during the games. It's huge. I feel like I could even tip this argument more in the favor if I also lumped in, like, the betting now that you can have on FanDuel and, like, these other sports betting apps where I feel like more people now are watching these games for either fantasy or because of whatever crazy parlay they put on something. I don't even really know what parlay is. I've never gambled in my life. Is that?
It's like when you have multiple bets together to make more money.
Nice. I went to Atlantic City in my life 2 times, and it was when I had some gigs. And, I never bet a penny.
No.
How about you? You betting man? You gambling man?
I'm not.
No, you're not a gambling man either?
No.
Well, that's my thought. I think that I'm going to say it is bigger.
I agree,
in my opinion. I think that, like, we're seeing the majority of people, like, the Super Bowl is its own thing now. Like, the Super Bowl is for very few people, like, the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl is literally, like, Christmas, Easter, whatever for people. It's like, it's a day, it's an event, almost like a holiday, where you get to eat a lot of cool, like, appetizers.
Yeah.
And,
I have to go to work the next day, though.
You have to go to work?
Well, but people do. I have to go to school.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Well, that's why they were also originally talking about, moving it back one weekend so that it lines up President's Weekend.
But then it's like, that's kind of disrespecting the presidents to have
Good point.
the Super Bowl on the weekend.
Yeah. Well, my friend, we've went on another epic voyage together. Any predictions for playoff weekend and given the proximity of our podcasts, Super Bowl? One thing we did not do, and I am going to give you your credit, and you did point it out to me. Back in week 2, you said that you could see Tampa in the Super Bowl.
I said I had them hosting the NFC Championship, which would only happen if they win and the Niners lose. But I was pretty close, so yeah.
I'm impressed. I'm going to give you your credit.
Thank you.
You're obviously wrong about your take on Belichick and other things, but you were right about Tampa Bay so far.
For sure.
Any final thoughts on anything playoff-wise coming up?
I don't think so. I think the Super Bowl, give me, I'm just going to stick with the Bucks because it's fun. It's going to be Bucks-Bills. I think the Bills are going to pull it out.
All right. I am going to go Lions-Texans. That's what I want.
Texans? Wow.
Lions-Texans.
That would be a fun one.
That'd make me happy. I'd see Lions and Texans play. That'd be a good one. Well, all right, everybody. Want to thank you so much for watching and listening. Please, as always, feel free to let us know what you think we are up to in that comment section. Let us know your thoughts and opinions on our takes, whether or not you feel that Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time, whether or not you feel fantasy football from a rooting perspective has overtaken the NFL, and whether or not home field advantage should be tweaked or if it is phenomenal, like I believe the way it is now. Till next time, stay cool, everybody. See you then.